As I was considering which topic to kick things off with, I picked this matter of crucial or significant conversations because I looked over the history of my last 15 years professionally, almost 20 years in marriage, and the course of my life as a whole. I thought what's the most if there was one thing that made the most difference, good or bad, what was it? And in the things that I set on fire in my life, those were the things that were these critical conversations that I was just blundering my way through. And sometimes it felt like those conversations they took on a life of their own, and it was like a mean train that I couldn't stop that was running me over again and again and again. And on the flip side of that, as I've been able to grow to some degree in handling those conversations with grace and effectiveness, those areas of my life went the other way. And so I especially see this in my marriage, right? I feel it in my closest relationships or in my relationships with my kids. And so I had a season maybe 7 years ago or so where there was a lot of tension in our relationship. And it felt like, even though I had good intentions, I was always communicating the wrong thing. Somehow Hannah was coming away from those conversations having experienced something completely the opposite of what I intended, right? I wanted her to feel supported, safe, secure, like she had space to be who she really was, and instead she felt compressed and injured and fearful and unsupported and discouraged. And I really couldn't figure out how to turn things around, but I knew they needed to turn around. 2 o'clock in the morning after one of those meltdown conversations, I'm exhausted and wondering what in the world just happened and what can I do about it. So I hope that this time together will help you guys who might experience some of those kinds of things in different situations find the kind of hope that I found and at least being able to identify when I messed up and what it was that was going wrong by having a model for understanding how the conversation unfolded, why it went off the rails, and at least be able to look back at myself and say, well, if I had been a little more of this or done a little more of that, maybe things would have gone differently. Does that sound valuable? Excellent. So on the business end of things, I probably have lost tens of thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of dollars in potential income and missed opportunity also because I didn't know how to handle these conversations well. I probably wasted a huge amount of time and money on relationships with employees and potential customers that didn't work out. Again, because I didn't either have these skills or execute them well in certain conversations that really mattered a lot. And I just recently had an experience like that maybe 6 or 7 months ago with a guy that the relationship just, it wasn't going the direction that I expected. And it was kind of a messy break when he left. And I was in a funk for a month from that. And it was very difficult to reach out to potential clients or keep my head in the game otherwise as that was unfolding. So it's pretty hard to calculate the amount of damage that failed conversations will do, as it's just kind of like this domino effect, right? That if you've got one of your personal relationships that's messed up, it makes it really hard to keep your head in the game in the rest of life. On the flip side of that, handling crucial conversations well, it makes beautiful things happen everywhere. Even just in the last week, I can see the relationship with my uncle. I was on a call with him for a financial situation, and that grew into something much more, and I feel closer to him today than I did last week. I had a crucial conversation with my wife, Hannah, in the last week also that probably in a previous citizen would have turned into a nuclear meltdown. But we are now closer because of that conversation, and that is just really amazing. So now that we're clear about what's at stake, let me give you a couple of models that I think will be really valuable, and then we'll have some interaction around those. So the best outcome for conversations, I think, are like that closeness in relationships, tackling tough problems, growing ourselves, and really moving things forward in challenging places. And also it's a space to both have our greatest need in life met and to meet the greatest needs of others. Happens in this conversational space. Dr. Henry Cloud says that from womb to tomb, our greatest need is to be known and understood. Our greatest need is to be known and understood. And that's a foundation for trust, which is the foundation for teamwork, collaboration, and all of the other things that we want to conquer in life. Most of the time, we need other people to be able to make those things happen. And so the ability to understand and be understood and make a healthy space for that to happen is foundational for success. So this happens best when communication flows freely between participants in a conversation. And there's this really great book that a lot of this comes from called Crucial Conversations. And the authors of that book say it's like having a pool of shared meaning in the conversation. So you could imagine just a pool that can have water flowing into it. And the best conversations get like all of the meaning if we all have like a pitcher or a bucket of meaning. If we all dump our meaning into the pool through this free-flowing communication, that is the best case scenario. Because shallow pools are dangerous. And if you jump into a shallow pool, you're likely to be injured. If you are making decisions based on a shallow pool of understanding, you're much less likely to make the best possible decision. But by contrast, if you have a deep pool and a broad pool of meaning, you have the best odds of making the best decisions, having the best relationships, creating the best outcomes. So I encourage you to think about how can I deepen the pool and how can I avoid having a shallow pool in the conversation. So the authors of Crucial Conversations call that flow of meaning, they call that dialogue in a really specific sense. And in some cases, dialogue is pretty easy. But when emotions are high and stakes are high and opinions are really different, our natural instincts sometimes will lead us into behaving in a way or talking in a way that actually shuts down the flow of meaning. So any of you been in a conversation like that recently where either you or somebody else reacted in a way that really shut the conversation down? Like you had an idea and somebody's like, that's ridiculous. Been there? Yeah, I had one like that this morning, so it's it's real time for me. But these are the qualities, though, to look for when you're trying to figure out whether you're in a crucial conversation or not. So when you can feel the intensity increasing, pay attention. When you feel your own emotions getting stronger, pay attention. When you feel the emotions of your conversation partner getting stronger, pay special attention to that because your instincts are very likely to lead you astray. So if you could gain one habit and only one habit from this, so if you can gain the habit of paying attention to the conditions in which the conversation is happening, instead of just the content of the point that you want to make or the point that the other person is trying to make, that will make a world of difference. So we'll get into detail about some other things, but if you can only remember one thing, remember to do that. Because our natural fight or flight responses to stress don't really help us do our best thinking or communicating, do they? Right? They pump us up to punch people in the face or run away really fast. They don't set us up to love, honor, respect, and care for people, or to be grounded in our thinking, or to be compassionate or respectful. Anybody else have ever been like flooded and then afterwards when like your conversation partner says, you said this, and you're like, I don't remember saying that. Why would I ever say that? That sounds insane. I can't even count the number of times I've heard that. And most people think of me as a pretty grounded and low-key guy. I think of myself as a grounded and low-key, respectful, caring person. But sometimes in the middle of an intense moment, like there's like a heart shift that happens. And I let go of the things that I really want, and I start trying to win or do something else. Been there? So here's a way that you can, if you start to feel tension rising, you can make a shift. And it's to ask this question, like you start with heart and ask, what do I really want in this situation? What do I really want for myself? What do I really want for others? What do I really want for the relationship? And you'll never get it right with others if you don't get that heart piece right. It's very hard to fix your behavior or your language if you're not oriented properly in here. And so that's a great question to be able to create a reset and move yourself away from an instinctive response to like a genuinely heart-driven response that's toward what you really want. And the other thing that's helpful about that question is it starts to bring your higher reasoning part of your brain back online again. Because if you drop into these things sometimes and it feels like you're just in the face of an immediate threat, right? Like you just heard somebody say something that you think is really stupid or is really disrespectful or feels attacking toward you, the automatic response is to want to set up for defense or find a way to get away. But neither of those is really helpful for dialogue. So if you can learn to turn down the noise inside, it makes it possible then for you to pay better attention to what's happening and to respond well. And so you might think of the training that people go through in like the martial arts. I'm not a martial arts guy, but the thing that I really admire about the best players, really in any sport, but I think especially in martial arts, is their ability to be like punched in the face, or kicked in the gut, or under these intense circumstances, but they are so aware of what's happening. And they stay attentive to what they really need to do, and they're not taken off center by the attack or by the environment. They're staying in control of their own person. And conversations certainly can feel that way. And so hopefully we'll be making our way toward being like conversational ninjas. So there are two critical conditions to a conversation for dialogue to continue to happen. And those two most important conditions are safety and respect. I love this quote from Crucial Conversations. Safety and respect are like oxygen. In a conversation, nobody notices them until they are gone. But when they're gone, it's all people can think about. It's like oxygen to a conversation. If it's gone, it's all people can think about. So just imagine that somebody snuck up behind you right now and they're choking you, right? You can't breathe. You couldn't possibly think about solving a math problem, being compassionate to a neighbor, or anything else, right? All you can think of is how to break out of being choked. Or imagine that you fall into a pool and you don't really know how to swim well. All you can think about is getting to safety. Or imagine that you've just been disrespected in some way. It's going to be pretty hard to resist the desire to defend your pride, to defend your personal value, to defend your humanity, right? That feels like an assault. And so if one of those two conditions goes away, the conversation is no longer about whatever the issue at hand was. It's now about either a fight for safety or a fight for respect. But either way, it's a fight, and it's not likely to turn into something productive. And just to give you a little illustration about how this can work, I'd love to tell you the most versatile insult I have ever heard. So I'd like all of you to think of something that you did in the last 24 hours, and when I count to 3, I just want you to say it out to me, something that you did in the last 24 hours. I'll give you 10 seconds to think about it. Doesn't matter. That's why it's so versatile. All right, so you got it? Something you did in the last 24 hours? All right, so tell me on 3. 1, 2, 3. You would. No, so if I had said it with a little more vengeance, some of you probably would have felt a little urge to smack me back right now. And but sometimes we do that in conversations, right? Like we've seen a pattern in someone's life. They tell us that they're facing some challenge, and we're like, you would, right? I know you. I know all about you. Of course it would end up that way. Of course this is what you're going to do. Of course that's how you're going to be. I already know. Well, that's a shallow pool of meaning, baby. And that's an opportunity for injury for sure. Yeah, right. Yeah. So there's a real difference between opening a space to know and be known, and really promoting that you already know. And so there's a healthy degree of humility required there. I hope that you never get any use out of my most versatile insult ever. So here's the thing, you can never handle the content of the conversation if the conditions of the conversation are not right. Conditions trump content. Conditions trump content. It's always conditions first. If you don't have the appropriate environment, whatever it is that you are trying to accomplish will not happen. The founder of the company that I work with, Gary Keller, he always says, create an environment that supports your goals, and that's true for conversations as well. So create safety, create respect, and that is the right environment for healthy conversations in general, but for crucial conversations in particular. And lots of the time you'll find yourself dropped into one of these, and the other person's experience of safety or respect is already gone. And so they're already behaving in a way that might be kind of irritating. They might go to some form of silence or violence, like silence would be like stonewalling, like just not saying anything, shrinking back into themselves, walking out of the room, anything that is intentionally stopping them from pouring into the pool of meaning. Violence would be something like name calling or shouting or anything else that's about forcefully trying to control the conversation and maybe forcing their meaning into the pool, maybe because they feel like it's not safe enough for that to happen in some other way. So this happens in my house a lot. I shouldn't say a lot, but it happens a lot when I run over the kids especially. And my kids are here, so there's high accountability for everything that I'm sharing with you, and Hannah is here. But we see this happening, that one of the kids will say something, and from my parental perspective, I think I already know the situation, and so I make some assumption about it, and then I issue a command about what should happen. Generally, that escalates the intensity of the situation. So that's when I'm not doing it well. Sometimes I do well and can navigate the other way. But we'll see things like just voices raised, or sometimes I'll raise my voice, or I'll grab something from somebody, and all of these would be in that kind of like violence category. So you can see when safety or respect is lost because one or more of the parties in the conversation are retreating to silence or violence. And I'd just like to note here that a lot of the chaos that's happening in the outside world right now, you could look at it in the lens of like this group and this group are trying to have a conversation with each other or not trying to have a conversation with each other. And I would suggest that many of the wars that we have seen, a lot of political infighting, a lot of community breakups, a lot of church splits, and a lot of other things stem from not attending to the conditions of the conversation between those groups properly. And so there's this back and forth of retreating into silence or going for violence because one side was feeling completely unheard by the other side. So that might be a piece that could be helpful for navigating toward world peace a little bit if you're interested in that. So here's the big challenge. Is that these behaviors are super irritating. It's super annoying if it seems like the other person's not understanding, or they're taking cheap shots at you, like you're trying to get a conversation about solving a problem. They're like, well, at least I don't, fill in the blank. Or maybe you do that, right? They want to tell you something and they're like, well, you've been doing this and this and this and this and this, right? That's going to be like a counterattack. So pay attention for those things. You will want to respond with your own forms of silence or violence because what the other person is doing will probably feel like some kind of attack either on your character or just in general. And your instinct is going to be to get furious. And I want to encourage you that at the moment that you feel like you should become furious, you should become curious. Right? At the moment that you feel that nudge to become furious, get curious. Get curious about what it is that's causing them to behave in that way. Is it about respect? Is it about safety? What is it that's important to them that's threatened that they feel like they need to defend? What is that thing? And if you can get to the bottom of that, it's going to help you a lot. So learn to interpret that differently. It's a sign that you need to look deeper, not a sign that you should counterattack or that you should create a defense. Yes, go for it.
How would you categorize when someone, you're having a conversation with someone, and this is something I do, and you get a significant amount of information, but it's not all the information, and I jump to a conclusion or say, maybe this is the way you could go forward, and I don't have enough information. So I should have asked a question rather, I should have phrased it as a question rather than doing it this way.
Yeah.
How would you categorize that? 'Cause that's my biggest.
So you're saying that there are sometimes situations where you realize after having made a statement that you really should have asked a question first.
Right, because I didn't have enough information.
Well, I think it's always fair to be honest about that and just say, hey, I'm a little concerned that, and we're gonna get to that a little bit later actually. So rather than dive into it here, just know that there's a piece of this out ahead that I think we'll get to that. And so, if you notice that the conditions of the conversation are eroding, one of the tools that you can deploy to bring things on track is something called creating mutual purpose. And this can help to generate safety and respect in the situation. So creating mutual purpose is really answering the question like, why should we continue talking at all? Why should I bother to engage with you in a real way? And if you can identify a shared purpose between you and the conversation partner or the group, it makes a big difference. And so that might look something like we care together about the safety of our families in the community. This kind of outcome is happening. We'd both prefer for that outcome to not be happening. What's the best path forward? And so a mutual purpose will generally lead to a what's the best way conversation. And so a lot of times we're kind of like furiously agreeing with each other in some way. A good example of this actually happened at this church. The board got 2 letters in the same month from people who were kind of critical about some things that were happening in church life. And on the one hand, our instinct as leaders was to collectively say, good grief, that's nuts. And why didn't they come to us? They sent a letter? Come on! The truth was, they were concerned about similar things that we were concerned about. And they were concerned that we were answering the what's the best way question in an unhealthy way. And so that was their attempt to help us get more on track with a mutual purpose of bringing people into like healthy and vibrant relationship with God. So on the defensive end, we could have said, shame on them, they already left the church, forget it. I was in the middle of learning about this stuff, so I thought I would try it out. And so I invited them into a phone call, each of those people. Said, hey, I really want to hear from you about this. I think that we're on the same team here, and maybe you have something meaningful to share about how we're doing life. So if there's something for us in this, I want to hear about it. And then I got on those calls with those people, and I think that the relationships were greatly helped. Now, they didn't return to the church or anything, but I'm able to be in relationship with those people, and I think that when they see other leaders from this church, the interaction will be different because those conversations happened and because we didn't stay in a defensive posture. But it would have been easy to do. Tracking so far? Okay. I'll say be sincere. I use the word tactic carefully because nobody wants to be techniqued or tactited. Right? It has to be sincere. I'm saying if you understand the principle, then you can identify when mutual purpose was lost. and you might be able to find a way to regain it again. So even if you blew it, being able to come back to a person and say, hey, I'm sorry. I really believe that we together should be about this. How do we get there? You can return to dialogue and restore it in that way. And eventually then if you do that, then you can go then to idea generating. Once you've got the mutual purpose established, then you and the other person can dialogue. It opens up a lot of possibilities. And it doesn't mean that you have to accept what they think is the best way, or that they have to accept what you think is the best way. But at least you have the opportunity for your solution to have a fair hearing and their solution to have a fair hearing. And if you give them some space to share theirs, the odds that they'll hear yours is much higher. Making sense so far? Sometimes you have to give respect to get it. Actually, you pretty much always do. Another good strategy can be using contrasting statements. So often your conversation partner is going to have some predetermined sense of what your posture is in the conversation, that you have some kind of an agenda. And if you can pick up on that, that might be like they might think that you're trying to cut them down or attack their character or call them irresponsible if you're trying to have a confrontational kind of conversation about a situation that's not healthy for them or for you. That can feel like a character attack. So if you can anticipate those, you can create safety through contrasting statements that say what your intentions are not. So you could say, I'm not trying to attack your character here. I'm really about this. I really want our relationship to be healthy. I'm not trying to attack all of your work. I generally think that your work is really, really good. But in this one area, this unhealthy outcome is happening in our working relationship or in the team or in the company or in the church or in the family. And if you can get ahead of that and help them understand your intent by saying, I'm not about this, then you can create that safety, you can create more respect, which is better conditions for the conversation. Does that make sense? So sometimes you have to step outside the content of the conversation and restore the conditions and then step back into the content. So if you think you're giving a healthy delivery of something that's going to be a bit of a hot topic, and then you see that the person is not responding in dialogue, they're retreating into silence or violence in some way, then you might step into contrasting statements to help you along the way, or you might go to creating mutual purpose. Let me circle back to one thing I missed about mutual purpose. So there are varying levels of mutual purpose, and they're kind of, you can think of it as like climbing a mountain in altitude. At some point there are unifying, generally human values that you can tie a conversation back to if you raise the level enough. So if you have groups of people that are having a hard time understanding each other, something like safety and prosperity for our families, for our children, that is enough to unify the vast majority of humanity. So you don't always have to elevate to that level, but depending on what environment you're in, you can think about like, what's the next thing up that we might be able to agree on? And then maybe you can work your way back down into that thing that's in front of you. But if you can get to a unifying value up at high altitude somewhere, the influence of that value can filter down into the very particular situation that you're facing at the moment. That make sense? Okay, so safety, respect, mutual purpose, contrasting statements. Okay, so sometimes when it matters most, we are on our worst behavior. We can get overrun by our feelings in the moment or the feelings of others that say and do things that then we regret. And one big question is like, how do we make this better? I think this was the biggest challenge for me, was figuring out how do I turn down the emotional noise inside of myself so that I don't lose myself in the moments that matter and do and say things that I later regret. And I think in order for this to work out, the authors of Crucial Conversations, they make two really bold claims. And so if you feel slightly offended inside, I think that that's normal. I don't always like this either, but I think they're right. So the first one is this, that you and only you create your negative emotions. Other people don't make you mad. You make you mad. And the second bold claim is that once you have created your upset emotions, you only have two options. You can either act on them or be acted on by them. You either master them or you're a hostage to them. And that's probably a little countercultural. I think that there's a trend of wanting to blame outside people for our internal experience. And I certainly have done plenty of that, especially if you're married or in some other really close relationship. It is really easy to blame the other person because they did and said this and this and this and this, and that made me feel this way. So worst of dialogue are just going to fall prey to their emotions in this common trap of assuming something is true that really isn't true. You're going to feel like it's a certain way and act like that's the truth. And sometimes that can be really destructive. Some people will try to hold their emotions in instead of expressing them or working their way through them. And so they know that that's maybe not going to lead to a good outcome, but then those things, they leak out in other places. And so trying to mask the feelings, that doesn't really work out well. And the best at dialogue will act on their emotions by thinking through them and then choosing behaviors that will actually be helpful in the moment. And the really empowering model, I think, for dealing with strong emotions is something that they call a path to action. So I'd like you to imagine a set of, or just a box on the right-hand side of a whiteboard. And in that box, it says the word action. That's the thing that you can see or hear someone doing on the outside. And then just to the left of that box, I want you to imagine another box that has the word feeling in it. And so we have feelings or emotions, and they evoke motion. We do whatever we're doing because we're feeling something. And then imagine another box to the left of that says see or hear. That's the input, something that someone said or did, or something that they saw or heard. And the question here would be, is there some interim step in between the hear-see box and the feel box or the emotion box? And you can check this by asking yourself if sometimes in the face of the same thing you saw or heard, do you always feel the same way? So what do you think? When you think about things that you sometimes hear in a certain context and sometimes you hear it in another context, is your reaction the same or different? Different. It's different, right? So that means that there is some interim step in there. So then what is it? The authors of Crucial Conversations say that this is the story box. It's the story that we tell about what we saw or heard that causes us to feel a certain way about it. So when my spouse says that trigger phrase about that hot button issue for me, and I immediately feel angry, it's because I'm telling myself the story that means that she's not understanding me, and she's not respecting me, and she doesn't care about what's important to me, and this is not going to end well. And all of that happens before I can even think about it. So then I start feeling disrespected, I start feeling hurt, and I haven't investigated anything, but I already have a feeling, and already my tone of voice changes, my vocabulary changes, my posture changes, and my conversation partner can feel all of that. And the conversation is eroding right there because of the story that I told in a millisecond after hearing or seeing something. So don't underestimate the power of that. Does that make sense? That we see or hear something, we assign meaning or motive to that something, sometimes with very limited information. Then we have a feeling, and then we're ready to take action. So the story is the part that we can influence because we're the only one telling it, or at least from our perspective, right? Obviously, our conversation partner is telling a story about us too, and maybe we can exercise some influence over that story. But we can influence our own story about what's going on. And if we leave ourselves available to an alternative interpretation of the facts, then we make ourselves available to a more productive story about the facts. Because as you know, if I give you, any of you guys ever played like there's this like conspiracy creation game where you can take like an object and an adjective and you give that to a person and they'll tell you a conspiracy theory related to those two things or like involving those two objects. There's an unbelievable number of stories that you could make up about like why there's a fork like left in a cereal bowl, or why there's red liquid on the floor, right? It could have been a murder, or it could have been my 14-month-old. We really don't know. So from those same facts, you could spin an infinite number of stories. And often we'll pick the worst possible one, and then we'll start acting like it's true. I'll give you a fun illustration from a time in youth group. So I came to my church, and there's this girl who was really riled up, and she walks up to me and says, "How could you?" And then she kicked me in the crotch. And I'm like, whoa, that was pretty intense. So I wrote her off in that moment because she clearly was telling a very negative story about me and was having some very strong feelings about that based on some other things that somebody else in the youth group had told her. So her story was that I had heard some negative thing about her, which I actually hadn't heard, and that I had spread it to a whole bunch of other people, which I actually hadn't done. But it was enough for her to act on it with violence. So just be careful about that. I did not have the crucial conversation skills at that time, so I retreated into silence. Me and my junior high friends talked to each other behind her back about that. Please don't do that. But it's a good illustration, though, of how quickly we can see or hear something, tell a story, feel something, and then do something that really doesn't make any sense, but it feels like it makes sense. I'm sure that she felt like this is the best thing to do. Man. Yes. So this is another spot where we can ask ourselves this question. Why would a normal, reasonable, and rational person do what this person is doing? Get curious rather than furious. Why would a normal, reasonable, and rational person do this? Because we want to like sell out the other person's motives, right, and turn them into a villain. Most people are not villains, even the ones that initially seem like they're crazy or we want to apply some other label to them. Now, the path to action can help you in two really big ways. So you can use it for yourself, and you can use it for others. So in yourself, if you're monitoring your own behavior, monitoring your own internal experience, monitoring your story, then you can question those things. You can check them out. And that will help you then to be able to more effectively share with your conversation partner what's going on. So you could say, Kylie, why is it that I'm acting this way? And that makes you aware of your actions, which is a big step in the first place. Once you know why you're acting that way, what it is that you're feeling, you can ask, what story am I telling? And if you become aware of the story that you're telling before you do something about it, then you can check it out with the other person. You can be like, I'm beginning to feel like maybe you don't really want fill in the blank. Is that true? Man, that can be different. And you can use that then to explain what your actual facts are, like the thing that you can see and hear. So not the mean part, the story part, but the facts part are pretty indisputable. Like, you showed up 5 minutes late to 3 meetings last week. And I'm beginning to think that maybe you don't care that much about showing up on time. Is that really what's happening? Help me understand. You can see how that might lead to a better outcome in changing that behavior than, good grief, you don't even care about our meetings, do you? Do you even respect the team? Come on. You ever been on the other side of one of those? I've been on the other side of those, man. It's not good. So you can also use this with other people to help turn down the emotional temperature. And this is the one that's been really valuable for me. I used to really struggle with figuring out what to do in the face of intensity. And you can take you usually will drop into a crucial conversation. Somebody is already in the action box. And if you can work backwards through it with them, you can ask them, like, I'm picking up a lot of intensity here. Where's that coming from? It seems like maybe something important to you, you're concerned that something bad's going to happen to it. What might that thing be? Or you can, if you want to borrow one from Susan Scott, who wrote Fierce Conversations, very excellent book, by the way, you can just ask, what are you feeling right now? And then they might tell you one thing. They might say, I don't know. And if they say, I don't know, I say, if you just had to guess, what would it be? Maybe. Now, some people don't want to commit because they might find out later that that wasn't really it. So, and then ask, is there anything else? Anything else you're feeling? And then ask them again, maybe 3 times, 4 times. And it's amazing the stuff that will emerge if you just go a little more, and there will be something added to the pool that you had no idea was there. Like, I had no idea that you thought that this thing going on would cause you to lose that. And so you think that you're just solving this little problem right here. And for them, it's like, I feel like that's going to be like a major blow to our relationship, or that I'm going to lose this friend if I do that, or that some other really important thing is going to be damaged. So once you get to that, then you could ask them, like, well, how did you arrive at feeling that way? That's the story. And maybe the facts. And that gives you an opportunity then to hear their story from them. And even if you don't agree with their story, this was another hard one for me because I think that my story is right. And I think that their story is wrong. And so I want to tell them, you're interpreting that all wrong. I don't really mean that. Come on. I can't even figure out how many hours I've spent in conversations like that, where I'm just trying to tell the other person, like, you're wrong about me and my intentions. And I'm learning to, in those moments, say, I'm sorry for whatever I did that contributed to that. I really don't want you to feel that way. And that's using a contrasting statement to do that. I don't want you to feel that way. I'm not about this. I really want to be about this. So what did you see me do or hear me say that caused you to think that I was over here and not over here? And that's where the transformational magic happens. Because sometimes things that I thought were going to be encouraging were not discouraging. So I was actually pumping discouragement into the relationship unknowingly until I worked my way through the path to action back to the facts of what I was saying or doing that created that story, that created that feeling, that created that intensity that I was then experiencing from that person. Making sense so far? Is that useful?
Yes.
All right. So there are 5 basics when we are going to tackle something that we think could be offensive, that can be really helpful. And these can be understood via the acronym STATE. So the S is for share your facts. The T is for tell your story. The A is for ask for others' paths to action. The T is to talk tentatively. And the E is to encourage testing. So sharing your facts, make sure that they're actually facts. Yeah, go ahead.
Can you go over that again a little slower with the acronym?
Oh, yes. So it's STATE, share your facts, tell your story, ask for others' paths, talk tentatively, and encourage testing. And I can email you my notes later if you want.
Okay.
So just let me know if you want them. And then I'm also recording the presentation part too, which I can send you guys later if you want. So the key to sharing your facts is that they're actually facts. It's something that you can see, hear, touch, taste, or smell. And the great thing about facts is that they're uncontroversial. So if you start there, it's pretty hard for people to think that you're crazy. And then from there, if you tell your story, it will help you if you tell it as a possible story. The more forceful and absolute you are about your story, the more the other person is likely to resist you. Because generally we intuitively know that there are lots of interpretations of the facts and that we have the potential for being wrong. So if you act like you don't, people will write you off. This is why alwayses and nevers are really problematic. Alls and nones are really problematic, especially in conversations about faith. So for those of you who are like Jesus followers and want to draw other people closer to Jesus, this one might strike you as really counterintuitive. But being open to the possibility that you're wrong with non-believers, not that you are actually going to give anything up, but just in principle to say, let's go ahead and examine the ideas. I'll pretend that I could be wrong. It really changes the tone of the conversation. And the odds that you will have the opportunity to share your side go way up if you talk more tentatively. And that's a tough one, because the things that we have our strongest convictions about, the things that matter most to us, this is the hardest place to do it. But in service of the higher cause, I'll just encourage you to consider that. Those of you who are praying folks, you can let the Holy Spirit speak to you about that. Ask for others' paths. This is the opportunity to explore with them, as I was explaining earlier. And once you've heard their path, the odds that they'll give some honor to yours goes way up. And talking tentatively, again, the more tentatively you speak, the more people are open to your message. So even as I'm delivering this to you, you're hearing me sprinkle in things about, I'd like you to consider this, I'd like you to think about it. This probably could help you. I'm not guaranteeing that it will, because I want to talk tentatively. In the email invite that went out to all of you, Hannah's a copy editor by trade, and she said, I'm editing for humility because I don't want people to think that you know it all and you're here to teach them from above, because you're not. And that's absolutely true. So I changed a whole bunch of the wording in there to change the tone of that so that I wouldn't come across as having absolute authority on the subject. Just an invitation for us to grow together. And encouraging testing, this comes to what you were asking about earlier, Paul, to either invite opposing views or invite questions and model by disagreeing with your own view. Yeah, so you could say something like, what is it that I might be missing here? Or you could say, hey, I'm concerned, I think that this might be the way to go, but I'm concerned that there's something more to it. So could you tell me about this? Or what do you think I'm missing? What question didn't I ask that you think I should ask? Go ahead.
Could I make a comment?
Yeah.
Share your facts. I'm wondering if it's better to begin with let the other person share their facts, because facts are not facts. They have a context. For example, for 2 hours my grandma was in a room that averaged 70 degrees, so she must have been pretty comfortable. However, 1 hour the room was 0 degrees, and the second hour the room was 140 degrees. So the variability of the room killed her. But the fact was that the average temperature was 70 degrees, but that wasn't the key, that wasn't the important fact. So sometimes we'll have different facts and they're both true, and one may be more important, one set may be more reliable than another.
Yeah, I 100% agree with you that oftentimes it will be valuable to get the other person's story first. So there are certain situations when it's important to, this might be more, the state model is probably more valuable for when you're heading into something and you know that it's going to be a hot button thing, but it's a conversation that you need to have. So something is happening that's like an outcome that you don't like or the organization doesn't want. And you need to have a private conversation with an individual who's contributing to that outcome. And so you need a way to respectfully broach the issue. And the way that you can do that most respectfully is to use something like the state model. There's also, in fierce conversations, there's a confrontation conversation model in there that also is very good. And you could look to that as well for a way to just prepare for a conversation that you expect is going to have tension in it. So in most of your other situations, generally it's better to lead with questions and have more questions than statements. And so yeah, that's a really good insight. There are a lot more like layers of this that you can dig into, and so I encourage you to like get a copy of Crucial Conversations or Fierce Conversations. They're both available on Audible, and I don't want to try to like cram too much into our time together today, but I want to give you a couple of tie it together thoughts here, and then have a little bit of interaction with you around these. And so, again, the most like significant thing is that when you want to become furious, get curious, get at the source of what that unsettling feeling is. Get to the source of the fear or the anger and what it is that's important to them. And be careful not to assign negative motives to the person who's expressing intense feelings. That is really easy to do. But that intensity is coming from somewhere, and your best opportunity lies on the other side of understanding that. And I really like how Chris Voss, who wrote a book, Negotiating Like Your Life Depends on It, Never Split the Difference. He's a retired FBI hostage negotiator. And he says he never starts with a guy who's like holding a bank hostage with, this is a terrible idea, it's not going to end well. It starts with, how did we get here today? What caused you to feel like this is the best option? And then you can work your way through it from there. Well, this is a whole lot easier to understand than it is to do, so I want to encourage you to be gracious to yourself. I prayed a lot for this, and I continue to pray a lot for this, that my heart would be right in these situations, that I would maintain humility, that I would maintain encouragement, that I would not get lost in the emotion of it all, but that I would stay attentive to the things that are truly important. So commit to trying again, and just use these tools to understand what happened. Debrief with yourself. Do a postmortem on the conversation. And say, where did I lose respect? Where did I contribute to an unsafe environment? What's my response style when I'm under stress? Right, if I'm starting to feel threatened, how do I normally respond? If you can identify that pattern, boy, that really can help you a lot, because you can keep an eye out for it. And just raising your awareness is a win. So if you keep growing in your awareness of the right things, you will succeed in more and more crucial conversations, which will yield more and more success in every arena of your life. And I like how Craig Groeschel puts it in his book, The Power to Change. He always talks about that being in training is a win. And every time that you train, you're winning. And as you train, you'll eventually get to the goal that we typically think of as the win. So if you're looking to have a 95% batting average and like success in crucial conversations, as you continue practicing, even as you fail and review, that's still winning. And eventually it will get you to that goal of like your higher average success.